Yeah.
Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. And then there was one. The Alabama Crimson Tide, the number one team in our way too early top 25. Who else would it be? Who else would it be? Yes, Alabama did not win the national championship last year. Down in Tuscaloosa, that's viewed as a disappointment. The Crimson Tide still went 13-2. They did win the SEC over Georgia, just were unable to defeat them in the national championship game, falling 33-18. But this Alabama team, guys, is absolutely loaded. Absolutely loaded. If you thought they were good last year, they're even better this year. There is no other team in the country that I think deserves to be the number one team heading in to 2022. Alabama is the national championship favorite once again, per usual, under Nick Saban. And we are here today to give you a brief outlook for this upcoming season and analyze their schedule to see what the path is for the Crimson Tide to return to the top of the college football world. So guys, as always, thank you so much for joining us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, share our videos. Again, we want you to become a part of our Gridiron Expert team. We want you to become a part of our college football community and what we are building here at the Gridiron Expert. So you can do that by hitting that subscribe button. You can do that by liking the video. You can do that by leaving the comment below, sharing the videos, spreading the word. We want you to become a part of this so you don't miss out on any of the college football content we have for you over these next few months. All summer long and, of course, all season long, and what is shaping up to be our best season yet. So please become a part of our Gridiron Expert Nation, guys. Become a part of the team. We want you here. We want you here, and we want to talk football with you. So we take a look at Alabama, guys. Again, down in Tuscaloosa, the expectations are national championship or bust, right? And that's to be expected when you have the best coach of all time in Nick Saban, and you have become a dynasty, not just for a couple of years, but for well over the last decade. Really since about 2008, Alabama has been dang near unstoppable, coming up on 15 years of this. The problems last year for Alabama were their offensive line and their defense. They had some issues there, and I think ultimately that was their downfall into why they were unable to win the national championship game. But neither of those positions and neither of those sections are going to be any worries anymore, especially defense. The majority of Alabama's defense comes back. They're led by one of the best defensive players in the country in Will Anderson. You look at offense, Bryce Young, the Heisman winner from last year, is back at quarterback, and Nick Saban went out and dominated the transfer portal, bringing in guys like Eli Ricks at cornerback from LSU, Jahmyr Gibbs at running back from Georgia Tech. Again, if you thought that last year's Alabama squad was good, you need to think again, because this team is loaded from top to bottom, and per usual, when Nick Saban doesn't get what he wants, he comes back with a vengeance. And that's exactly what we're going to see in 2022. We take a look at their schedule, guys. I will say that the first two games are kind of intriguing for me. Yes, I think Utah State is going to be a win for Alabama. We're not here to predict any games yet, but no one in their right mind is going to predict Utah State to upset Alabama in the season opener in Tuscaloosa. But let's keep in mind, this Utah State team is the reigning Mountain West Conference champion. They won 11 games last year, and they finished the year in the top 25. This is no slouch. It's not ULM in week 3. Utah State is not a game that Alabama can take lightly. But obviously the biggest, more intriguing game is what happens in week 2 when Alabama travels to Austin to take on Texas. A future SEC matchup. Now the Longhorns will be coming to the Southeastern Conference. Two fantastic programs, historic programs, a rematch of that national championship game all the way back in, 2009, 2010. So a great matchup here that is really going to see what Texas is made of more than Alabama. You know, everybody's going to be probably picking Alabama in this game. This is an opportunity for Texas to try to bounce back. Last year, the Longhorns went 5-7 in year 1 under Steve Sarkisian. This is an opportunity to where even if Texas falls in this game to Alabama, if they hang with the Crimson Tide, that maybe, just maybe, things might be turning a corner down in Austin. But this is going to be a very intriguing matchup, guys. One of the best matchups of week 2, one of the best early season matchups. We've been hyping this one up for years now, years between Alabama and Texas. Hopefully it will live up to the hype, but a great opportunity for both teams to flex their muscles, get a quality opponent early in the year before each head into conference play. Alabama wraps up the month of September pretty easily. ULM and Vanderbilt. How fortunate that the teams they draw out of the East are Vanderbilt and Tennessee. Tennessee, no slouch at all. But the other the other team they draw out of the East is Vanderbilt. They didn't get Georgia. They didn't get Tennessee and Kentucky. They didn't get Tennessee and an improving South Carolina team or a Florida team. They got Vanderbilt. How fitting is that? So they wrap up September with that, and then they go into their key stretch. October, really the entire month of October, is going to be tough for Alabama. And if Alabama were to fall to somebody, I believe it's going to come in the month of October. Starts with Arkansas on October 1st. A road game at Arkansas. Alabama has dominated the Razorbacks, having not lost to them since 2006, 2007. Arkansas nearly went into Tuscaloosa last year and pulled off the upset against the Crimson Tide, only falling 42-35. The game is now in Fayetteville. The Razorbacks are loaded on offense, solid offensive line, great running backs, great wide receivers, great quarterback in KJ Jefferson. Sam Pittman, like Nick Saban, went out and made some huge additions in the transfer portal, the majority of them coming on the defensive side of the ball. Arkansas, this is a trap game for Alabama. Big time. Big time. This is an opportunity possibly between a top 10 matchup. Arkansas very well could be 4-0 coming to this game. Alabama very well could be the same. Top 10, maybe top 6, 7 matchup in Fayetteville on October 1st. Arkansas coming so close last year would not surprise me in the slightest if the Razorbacks pulled off this upset over Alabama to kick off the month of October. Not a bit. Very, very tough game for the Crimson Tide. Right after Arkansas, they take on Texas A&M. A Texas A&M team that, yes, we do have in our top 10. A Texas A&M team that last year beat Alabama 41-38 in College Station. A&M's a team that, has high expectations again. But if I'm A&M, I'm not expecting to come into Tuscaloosa and to win this game. Yes, they did it last year in College Station, but you're facing off against an angry Alabama team and Nick Saban, and now you're having to go to Tuscaloosa, and that's a completely different atmosphere, completely different environment. You no longer have the 12th man on your side. But Alabama, angry, anxious to get revenge over A&M, can't afford to let emotions get the best of them. First off, against Arkansas, looking forward to the Aggies, but also can't afford to get too overconfident when they face the Aggies and risk falling to them at home. They then go on the road to take on Tennessee, a completely different Tennessee team than we saw from last year. Last year was a great year in year one under Josh Heupel. I think Tennessee greatly exceeded expectations. Alabama was struggling a little bit against Tennessee in that first half last year, ultimately pulled away to win 52-24. That game now in Knoxville, Tennessee will have one of the best offenses, not just in the SEC, but in the entire country, and will certainly test this Alabama defense that, as we mentioned, will be drastically improved, but one that certainly can be exploited. And then finally, they wrap up October because they get a bye week on the 29th against Mississippi State. They beat the Bulldogs 49-9 last year. It's in Tuscaloosa. The air raid, typically a difficult thing to stop for some teams, but I wouldn't imagine it would be for a defensive mind like Nick Saban. But that entire month of October, guys, is not easy. I think arguably the toughest two games are the two road games at Arkansas and at Tennessee. Two teams that have great offenses. And if I had to go out there and say which one would be the toughest, I'd say Arkansas. Right now, I believe the toughest test in the month of October for Alabama is the road game in Fayetteville. I think out of those four teams that we just mentioned, Arkansas is the most complete team out of those four. But Alabama, if they're going to slip up, I believe will slip up in those four games. After the bye week, they head into the final month of the year, back-to-back road games at LSU and at Ole Miss. Neither of those the Crimson Tide can afford to overlook. LSU dealing with a new coach in Brian Kelly. Almost beat Alabama last year. Only lost 20-14 in Tuscaloosa. But the Tigers still have a handful of questions across the board. Handful of questions on offense. Defense certainly has a few questions, especially after losing so many key pieces. Will they be able to upset the Tide? Even though it's in Death Valley, will they be able to upset them in year one under Brian Kelly? They take on Ole Miss on the road. That's going to be another tough one. So if you want to extend that key stretch from pretty much Arkansas all the way to Ole Miss, go ahead and have at it. Make it half the schedule, 6 full games. Because the road slate is not easy for Alabama. At Texas, at Arkansas, at Tennessee, at LSU, at Ole Miss. All of those games extremely tough and going to be very hostile environments. Ole Miss brings in Jackson Dart at quarterback to replace Matt Corral. Shouldn't really miss a beat on the offensive side of the ball. Just have to improve defensively. And that was Ole Miss's downfall last year, falling to Alabama 42-21. A lot of those touchdowns and points for Ole Miss coming late in the game when it was already out of reach. Austin Peay on November 19th, then Auburn, the Iron Bowl, to wrap up the year per usual. Last year, Alabama almost lost to Auburn, beating them 24-22 in 4 overtimes. A loss there would have kept Alabama out of the college football playoff. Would have been their second loss, one to A&M, one to Auburn. But they survived the game against the Tigers, crushed Georgia in the SEC title game, and then, of course, naturally fell in that championship game to Georgia. But the game against Auburn, even if you don't have high expectations for the Tigers, even if you want to focus on all the off-field issues Auburn's been dealing with, the Iron Bowl, everybody gives up for, and anything can happen, just like we saw last year. I don't think many people thought Auburn would win that game last year or even put up as solid of a fight as they did, and they came just a few plays away from pulling that one off. But you look at Alabama, guys, the schedule's tough. This, to me, is the best team in the country. They have the best coach in the country, and anything less than a playoff appearance, anything less than a national championship, really, is typically viewed as a disappointment. The road slate is difficult, and it would not surprise me in the slightest to see Alabama slip up to one of those games on the road, just like they did last year when they slipped up against Texas A&M. But ultimately, I do see this team back in the college football playoff. Again, if they don't, it would be a shock. And this is a Nick Saban-led team that, again, I could say might be one of his better teams that he's fielded in Tuscaloosa. Anything less than national championship is a disappointment, but I have a pretty dang good feeling that the Crimson Tide will be playing for one come January. So guys, as always, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, share our videos. We have wrapped up our schedule previews of the top 25 teams. We are now moving on to NFL draft coverage. That will begin tomorrow, so make sure to stay tuned for that. We've got so much content for you guys to get you through the draft. And then going into May, only about a month or two before we start predictions for every single college football team. So do not miss out on that. Become a part of our GE Nation today. And once again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.